All eyes have turned to South Carolina, where Democratic voters will vote in the First in the South presidential primary on February 29th. I sit down one-on-one with College of Charleston political science professor Dr. Gibbs Knotts for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and download my free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Dr. Gibbs Knotts, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Oh, likewise. I know the talk around town right now is about politics.
Oh man, this is the Super Bowl, World Series, and Daytona 500 all in one for me.
All in one for you.
Yeah.
If you could write about this particular presidential season right now, what would the title be?
Oh, I think it would be Biden's firewall ? Because that's the real question. I mean, Biden has always had February 29th circled on his calendar. He always knew this was a state he was going to do well. But I think he anticipated doing a little better in Iowa and New Hampshire. And so if he doesn't perform well in South Carolina, it's really all over for him. All the polling indicates that he's still got support, but there's still a couple of weeks. There's going to be a debate here at the Gilliard, and so there's still a lot left to happen before Biden can feel good about South Carolina.
Feels good. So if he's supposed to stand in front of the audience there at the Gilliard Center, what exactly should he say to South Carolinians?
Yeah, I mean, I think he should build on the reasons that he's been up in the polls in South Carolina already, and that is that he is a familiar face. He didn't just show up and start acting for folks' vote. He has a long history in this state. He has the best chance at beating Donald Trump, and talk about his support and working with President Obama. I mean, President Obama remains a very popular figure in South Carolina Democratic circles, and certainly among African-American voters as the first African-American president. I mean, Joe Biden was at his side for 8 years. He campaigned with him twice. And so if I were, it's almost like we play the bingo for debates. I would have how many times, if I were Joe Biden, can I say the word Barack Obama? Hillary Clinton did that at the Gilliard debate, if I think back too.
Right.
She was, of course, the Secretary of State debating against Bernie, and she talked about President Obama quite a bit. And I think that'd be a smart move for Joe Biden as well.
Where is Barack Obama?
It's a good question. So, I think it's pretty normal for a president to want to stay out, to not pick a particular person in a primary, and then once the nominee's picked, to really get on the campaign trail. He campaigned really hard for Hillary Clinton back in 2016, once it was Clinton versus Trump. I'd have my feelings hurt a little bit if I was Joe Biden, though, because he did have this, 8 years of working so closely together. They probably met, Lord knows how many times, and to not have not have Obama, give him a little bit more of a nod. But I think he's just trying to stay out of it, and then once the Democrats sort out who their nominee is, really get behind them. I'd be surprised if Barack Obama's not very involved in the general election.
You talked earlier about Bernie. Let me go to what Will Phillips said for Fitz News. He says this quote: "Could Joe Biden lose South Carolina? Yes. Although I would recommend the upstate conservatives pushing the pro-Bernie Sanders crossover voting to reconsider and vote for Tom Steyer if that's their goal. And to be clear, I cannot stand Tom Steyer." That's what both folks said. Why Tom Steyer?
Yeah, so Tom Steyer's doing well in South Carolina. Really surprised a ton of people. Some of the recent polling has him, as second in South Carolina.
Right.
Where did he come from? And I think Tom Steyer has been really, really smart. He spent a ton of money in South Carolina. You can't do anything on the internet without watching a Tom Steyer. I'm going to watch this Quintin's Close-Up, and a Tom Steyer ad's going to pop up before I get to watch the Quintin's Close-Up. And then, every day we go out to our mailbox, there's another flyer from Tom Steyer. And so he has spent a ton of money, but he's also put people on the ground. He's got a ground game. People are knocking on doors. So I think that explains Steyer's appeal. I do think there is some, President Trump's talked some about voting for the weakest candidate. There were some GOP county party leaders that encouraged people to go out and vote for Bernie, saying that he was the weakest candidate. I don't endorse that. I was really happy that the state Republican Party discouraged that. I think Hope Walker came out and said, we don't encourage folks to do this. I think it's undemocratic. I think we have an open primary to give people a choice if they genuinely see a candidate they like. But to me, it's undemocratic to say, okay, it's not illegal, but it's undemocratic to say, oh, I'm going to go in to another party's primary and pick out somebody that I think is a weak candidate to help out somebody in my party. And I also think, a couple other points I'd make on this potential. Number one, it's hard to guess who a weak candidate is. And so you don't want to a lot of people thought Donald Trump was a weak candidate and he ended up becoming the president. And so I'd be a little cautious on that. And I'm hopeful that people crossing over and causing mischief in the primary is very minimal. Primaries are not particularly high turnout contests. A lot fewer people vote in primaries than do in general elections as a percentage. So I'm a little skeptical that people are going to be so motivated to wreak havoc in the Democratic primary and go and vote in something that's pretty low turnout anyway. But it's an interesting dynamic. We have an open primary, so people are allowed to go and vote in whichever primary they want, and there's not a Republican primary this time.
You talk about people on the ground. Obviously, I just interviewed Edith Childs, who Channing fired up ready to go in 2008.
Okay.
And just yesterday as well, obviously, Gilgal Hunter from Orangeburg, she's throwing her support behind Steyer.
That's right.
Why are these people supporting Steyer?
I think Tom Steyer has done a good job of coming to South Carolina, spending time in South Carolina, and really focusing on the African American community and sitting across the table and saying, what is important to you? What are some things that we can do to make your lives better, to make America better? And so, I think he's worked to really, put the time in, has some policy. I mean, some of his policies, whether it's his policy in support for historically black colleges and universities, to some of his criminal justice reform efforts, to some of his education reform efforts and student loans. I mean, he's really, putting his money where his mouth is in terms of policies that could have a meaningful impact. But it's a little strange because even if he gets a big bump from South Carolina, I don't get the sense that he's investing a ton in any of the Super Tuesday states, and he's clearly not done very much in Iowa and New Hampshire. I think he is prioritizing South Carolina and Nevada. Maybe he can get some buzz. He obviously has a lot of money, but it is very strange. I totally agree. It's a strange. I did not see Tom Steyer coming up and being, in second or third. I do think Bernie could win the South Carolina primary, and that would take a lot of support going away from Biden, because I think Biden's still the favorite, but then the Biden support would have to get split. So some of the Biden voters might go to Buttigieg, some of them might go to Steyer, some of them might go to Klobuchar. Then maybe he falls below a little bit. And Bernie Sanders has that solid, probably 20%, 25% of diehard supporters that I don't see moving anywhere. They are on Team Bernie. They probably voted for Bernie Sanders in 2016, and they're very likely to vote for him again in 2020.
Why is there a disconnect between him and the African American community?
It's a good question. So, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, there's not that long history in South Carolina like there is with Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders, he obviously campaigned here in 2016. Right. And I do think the African American community in South Carolina, based on my research and my work, tends to be more religious than Democrats nationally, tends to be more moderate on some issues, and Bernie Sanders is pretty far to the left on most issues. And so, his policy positions don't always match up with the South Carolina voter in general and the South Carolina African American Democrats that are going to come out with the Democratic primary, because they tend to be a little more socially conservative, and Bernie Sanders is certainly somebody who is the opposite of conservative, is very liberal on almost every policy position.
And I want to go to Joe Cunningham in just a second, but where is Biden strong now in South Carolina, and where is Bernie strong in South Carolina now?
Yeah, great question. So, Bernie's strong with young people. Bernie's strong, with pockets of people that probably the South Carolina Democratic primary voter that identifies as liberal. There's not a ton of them in South Carolina, but there are some. Bernie's going to do with the folks that are ideologically liberal within the Democratic primary. Joe Biden, still everything I've seen, even though he's gotten a little bit of a drop with his Steyer movement, still really strong with African American voters, still really strong with older voters. I think certainly in the rural parts of South Carolina, the PD, in parts of the Midlands, when you take out Richland County, I think Joe Biden does really, really well. I mean, he just, he has the connections. He's formed these relationships. He's been talking to these folks for a long time. He's gotten some key endorsements. Marlene Kempson here locally is endorsed Joe Biden. And so I do think Joe Biden has some strength that's across the state. It's a key part of this coalition is African American voters, but certainly not all. But my question I keep coming back to is it certainly looks good in the polls, but are those folks movable? Are they committed and there's nothing that's going to change their mind? Or if they, have, now that they've seen Biden, 5th place in New Hampshire, maybe he underperforms in Nevada, let's say, I'm curious to see whether folks will start looking at some other candidate. There's not a Barack Obama in this particular field, but maybe there's some other folks that people will give a second look to. Tom Steyer, Bernie Sanders, maybe a Pete Buttigieg maybe for some younger voters. He's 38 years old. He could be attractive to some people, but I still think Biden's the favorite. I mean, if I had to say who's most likely to win South Carolina primary right now is Joe Biden. Bernie, I think, will do well. I don't see him having a very high. I think he's kind of capped, but I think he'll do well. And then I'm also curious to see whether Tom Steyer can hold on to some of those gains he's shown in polls. But I don't know, now that Klobuchar and Buttigieg are really investing in the state, whether they can peel some of that away from him.
You're around college kids all day. What are they telling you as far as who they are going to support?
It's a good question. I mean, College of Charleston has, a real mix of Democrats and Republicans. That's one of the things I like about it. It's pretty split between, there's a lot of folks who are diehard Trump supporters. But on the Democratic side, we've had every candidate here except for Joe Biden, pretty much. And, our biggest events were Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg. I'd say those three have the most support among college students. They're the people that are the most exciting. Obviously, Elizabeth Warren's candidacy is kind of on the decline right now. I don't know if she can rebound. So I would say for college students right now, it's Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg. It's kind of what I'm seeing the most support for.
And let me get back over to United States Representative Joe Cunningham.
Yeah.
He, according to Jamie Lovegrove of the Post-Story, is one of those only 2 Democratic congressmen from South Carolina forcefully rebuked United States Senator Bernie Sanders on Wednesday, jolting the state's first in the South presidential primary race just hours after the Vermont senator won in New Hampshire. In a statement to the Post-Courier, the first-term congressman from Charleston says he does not plan on making an endorsement ahead of South Carolina's February 29th primary, but will, quote, defend our low-country values of opportunities, practical wisdom, and common sense. Which candidate will happen to defend low-country values and obviously have common sense when it comes to this district?
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I'm so glad we're talking about Joe Cunningham because, we got 2 Democratic representatives in the U.S. House from South Carolina, Jim Clyburn and Joe Cunningham. And so, people are thinking, who is Joe Cunningham going to endorse? It sounds like he's planning not to endorse anyone. But, think about this. Whoever is atop the ticket for the Democratic nominee, they will be the first person you see when you go in and decide whether you're going to reelect Joe Cunningham in the 1st Congressional District. And so I think Joe Cunningham spoke out yesterday because he's concerned if Bernie Sanders, who identifies as a Democratic socialist, is the nominee in South Carolina. I think Joe Cunningham has made the calculation, and I think he's probably right, that is not particularly good for him in the type of district that he's in. I mean, just to remind folks, Donald Trump won the 1st Congressional District, Joe Cunningham's district, by 13 percentage points just 3 years ago in 2016. So it is a district that Republicans outnumber Democrats. It's a district that Republicans should win on paper probably 9 times out of 10. Joe Cunningham ran such a good campaign and took advantage of not having to run against an incumbent and was able to win. But I think he's having to figure out, okay, he's going to benefit a lot more from a more moderate candidate atop the ticket, maybe somebody like an Amy Klobuchar or a Pete Buttigieg, than he would from somebody like a Bernie Sanders, in my estimation. And so I think he was sort of speaking out. And then again, I just think, some people are going to say, I got no problem with the label of Democratic Socialist, but I'd say, across the state of South Carolina, that's not really a winning issue. And so I felt like Cunningham, and he must have made the calculation yesterday that he needed to say something or needed to speak out and say, look, I may be a Democrat, I'm asking for your vote, but I'm not aligned with Bernie Sanders. Now, when folks start running commercials, whether Bernie Sanders gets the nomination or not, they'll probably have pictures of Joe Cunningham and Nancy Pelosi or Joe Cunningham and Bernie Sanders, side by side on all the television's ads saying, don't send a Bernie Sanders Democrat back to Washington, vote for me. And so that's something that Southern Democrats have had to face for a long time. It used to be, don't vote for somebody who supports Ted Kennedy. And then it became, don't vote for somebody who supports Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton. Now it'll be, don't vote for somebody who is in the same party as Nancy Pelosi or Bernie Sanders. But I think Cunningham's done a nice job of saying, look, I represent the Low Country. His campaign motto was Low Country over Party. And he's really billed himself, and I think done a good job of saying, look, I'm not concerned about the partisan label. I'm concerned about being, the right representative for the 1st Congressional District. Sometimes I'll vote with Democrats. Sometimes I'll vote with Republicans. So that's the argument he's going to make. You can bet his opponent's going to make a different argument.
He also says this too, quote, South Carolinians don't want socialism. We want to know how you're going to get things done and how you're going to go about going to pay for them. Bernie's proposals to raise taxes on almost everyone is not something that the Low Country wants and not something I will ever support. What would he support from a different candidate?
Well, I think of somebody like, Amy Klobuchar was the nominee, let's say, and she talked about, I really want to invest in infrastructure, and I think we should do more to make the ports better. We should improve the road system. We should pump federal dollars in. We should do more to fund education and make college more affordable. I think those types of issues could win in the 1st Congressional District. And we should also make sure we're trying to balance the budget. If Bernie gets up and says, I want Medicare for all, and I want to forgive all student loan debt, and I'm not concerned about the deficit, those are not issues that Joe Cunningham's voters are going to be too receptive to. I think that would be, if that was Joe Cunningham's platform, he'd have a very tough time winning re-election. But I think he could get behind some of the proposals that some of the more moderate Democrats are talking about.
And let me turn to some other big news. Obviously, Vice President Mike Pence said this is coming to Charleston.
Right.
And obviously, he'll be speaking over at the Citadel later today. Right. What exactly do you want to hear from him?
I mean, I'm obsessed with the South Carolina presidential primary. I got this book out about the South Carolina presidential primary, so my brain is automatically thinking, yeah, exactly. There's no accident. He's already thinking about 2024, and he's like, oh man, I got to make sure. I'm probably gonna have to go up against Nikki Haley in 2024, so I want to make sure I'm starting to make connections. But in all seriousness, there's a long history of political leaders coming to Charleston, coming to South Carolina, coming to the Citadel. I'm curious to see kind of, what is he talking about? What are his key campaign issues that he's going to stress? Because the Trump administration, they don't have a contested primary. He's going to be the nominee. So I'm looking to see from Pence, what are their key arguments they're going to make for the 2020 election? And I would assume, they're going to talk about the stock market, unemployment levels, some of the things that they have, measurable successes on, and see what they emphasize. And Pence has always been, really a strong cheerleader for the president, a really strong supporter of the president. And I'll be interested to see kind of what parts of the president's record he decides to emphasize. Give us a little preview of what the 2020 general election will be like. I'm also curious to see if he weighs in on the 2020 Democratic contest. I don't know that he will, but I'm curious to see, does he talk about Bernie or Biden or anybody in the race that's currently out there. I'll be interested if he talks about impeachment too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Gibbs Knotts, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Oh, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
You likewise.